The Jonas Brothers rose to fame in the late 2000s, becoming one of the defining bands for their generation. With 6 albums, an American Music Award, Disney Channel movies, and reality shows, the Jonas Brothers have lived the American dream. But where did they get their talent? A close look at their family tree reveals some incredible stories and startling secrets. Paul Kevin Jonas Jr. was born on November 5, 1987, followed by brother Joseph Adam Jonas on August 15, 1989, and later Nicholas Jerry Jonas on September 16, 1992. They were born to parents Paul Jonas and Denise Miller. Paul and Denise were married in August 1985. Paul became the pastor here at the Wyckoff Assembly of God in New Jersey, while Denise worked as a sign language teacher until they became their son's managers. Paul Jonas Sr. was born February 13, 1965, the son of Cecilia Jonas. Cecilia was 17 years old when she gave birth to Paul. I was unable to find any information on Paul's father, and it does not appear that he was involved in Paul's life. Cecilia was the daughter of Paul Adam Jonas and Nellie Mae Fox. Paul Adam was born March 6, 1921 in Belmont, North Carolina. In the 1930 U.S. Census, we see Paul and his parents, Henry and Nora, along with his 4 brothers and a sister. His father and brothers all worked here at the Cramerton Mill. Paul married Nellie Mae Fox prior to enlisting in World War II. He fought with General Patton's Third Army, known for their aggressive tactics and swift advances in the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. Nellie Mae likely waited anxiously for his return, which he did after developing pneumonia while fighting. In the 1950 U.S. Census, we see Paul and Nellie living with Paul's parents, along with their 3 children. Paul, Nellie, and Paul's mother Nora all worked at the local textile mill, while Henry ran a grocery store. Paul's sister Lucille likely took care of the young children. Paul and Nellie had 6 children and were married for 67 years until Paul's death on December 5, 2008. Nellie, who loved to sing, passed away in 2011. In recent years, Paul Jonas Sr. returned to his hometown of Belmont, North Carolina, to open Nellie's Southern Kitchen, named in honor of his grandmother and based on her family recipes. Paul Adam Jonas's father, Henry Walter Jonas, was born March 7, 1883 in Belmont, North Carolina. He married Lucy May Yount in 1907. In the 1910 U.S. Census, we see Henry and Lucy living in Mount Holly, North Carolina, with their son, Russell. Henry and Lucy came to have 4 children. In 1918, the flu epidemic was spreading throughout the United States, often killing young, healthy people. Lucy contracted the illness and then developed pneumonia. She passed away on October 18, 1918, at the age of 29, leaving her young children ages 2 to 10. In the 1920 U.S. Census, we see Henry and the children living with Lucy's mother and siblings while he worked at the cotton mill. A few months later, on July 10, 1920, 37-year-old Henry married 21-year-old Nora Campbell, who also worked at the mill. Together they had 6 children, one of whom was Paul Adam. Henry passed away on May 5, 1969 from cerebral thrombosis, which is a blood clot in the brain, at the age of 86. Nora lived until 1976. Henry Jonas was the son of Andrew Luther Jonas, who was born November 25, 1857. In the 1860 U.S. Census, we see Andrew and his parents, Daniel and Adeline, living in the same region of North Carolina. Daniel worked as a farmer and was unable to read or write. In 1862, when Andrew was just 4 years old, Daniel enlisted as a Confederate soldier and went to fight in the deadliest war in U.S. history. On the rainy morning of May 12, 1864, Daniel was engaged in 24 hours of combat in the Battle of Spotsylvania, one of the most intense gunfights of the entire war. With thousands of men from both sides dead, some shot so many times they were described as heaps of flesh, Daniel was taken prisoner by the Union. He was taken here to Elmira Prison in New York. Referred to as Helmira, nearly 25% of the prisoners held here between 1864 and 1865 died from lack of nutrition, exposure, or disease. Daniel suffered here for several months until he passed away on January 17, 1865, from pneumonia. He was 42 years old. Daniel left behind his wife and 5 children. Ironically, Daniel's wife, Adeline Hanks, was related to President Abraham Lincoln. DNA testing has confirmed that Lincoln's mother, Nancy Hanks, was the illegitimate daughter of Lucy Hanks, born when Lucy was only 17 years old. When Lucy eventually married, Nancy went to live with Lucy's second cousin, Richard Hanks. Richard was Adeline Hanks' father. However, Nancy and Adeline never met. At the age of 36, Nancy was a married mother of 3 living in Kentucky when she developed what we now believe was milk sickness, an unexplained ailment that suddenly struck Midwestern settlers. It took over 100 years to identify the cause of milk sickness, which was cattle feeding on white snakeroot, a poisonous plant not found in the East. The cow's milk was then laced with the poison, which caused severe abdominal pain and vomiting, followed by the inability to stand or walk, and then a complete loss of muscle control and coma. Abraham Lincoln was only 9 years old in 1818 when he watched his mother suffer from this debilitating mystery illness, while Adeline Hanks wasn't born until 1823. While the 2 cousins never met, their fateful connection to this dark chapter in U.S. history is unique to the Jonas Brothers family story. Despite the loss of his father, Andrew Jonas married Alice Sigmund on September 1, 1878. They had 6 children, but Alice passed away in 1894 at the age of 36. In the 1900 U.S. Census, we see Andrew and his 6 children living in North Carolina, where he worked as a farmer. The Jonas family can be further traced back to John Jonas, who served in the Revolutionary War, and Simon Jonas, who arrived in Philadelphia in 1742, one of the early German settlers of Pennsylvania, before he moved to North Carolina, where he purchased 600 acres of land, thus beginning a long history of Jonases in North Carolina. On their maternal side, Kevin, Joe, and Nick's mother, Denise Miller, was born in 1966 to Gerald Miller and Frances Madonia. Gerald was born August 21, 1940, in Bronx, New York. He served in the U.S. Army between 1960 and 1963, where he was stationed in Germany. He married Frances on August 9, 1964. They welcomed 4 children while Gerald worked for the Postal Service. Frances was the daughter of Frank Madonia and Margaret Berard. Margaret was born November 14, 1923, in Bennington, Vermont. Her father, Milton Dewey Berard, was one of 11 sons born to William Berard and Ellen Comtois. Here we see William standing with his sons, and assuming they are standing in birth order, Milton would be last on the left. The Berard family lived in Quebec for over 200 years, dating back to the arrival of Gabriel Berard, who was born October 9, 1644, in Château du Loir, France. The son of a fine women's tailor, Gabriel arrived in Quebec around 1670, where he worked as a fur trader. He married 15-year-old Genevieve Ayotte on October 23, 1673. Gabriel and Genevieve had 11 children, 8 of whom survived to adulthood. In fall 1705, Gabriel left on a fur expedition, leaving Genevieve at home with at least their 3 youngest children, all under the age of 10. He never returned. There were many dangers in the Canadian wilderness. Wild animals, hostile strangers, any type of injury could have been fatal. Genevieve would forever wonder what tragedy befell Gabriel, who was last seen at the Tadoussac trading post, a replica of which still stands today. Denise's maternal great-grandfather, Angelo Madonia, was born March 30th, 1869 in Monreale, a beautiful Sicilian hillside town with a magnificent cathedral that dates back to 1182. The years leading up to Angelo's birth were likely difficult for his parents, Giacomo and Maria, as the various Italian kingdoms, largely controlled by France and Austria, were unified as a single nation in 1870. Angelo and his family likely experienced firsthand the many struggles of the new nation, including poverty and prejudice, which is what led many Italians to emigrate to the United States, transforming the social and cultural landscape of America. According to Angelo's naturalization papers, he arrived at Ellis Island on June 5, 1896, at the age of 27. Here, he would have been subjected to intense health screenings and proved that he was capable of supporting himself to remain in the U.S. Once in New York, Angelo met a young girl, Maria Chimera, who also emigrated from Sicily. In 1898, just as she turned 15, Maria became pregnant by Angelo, who was now 28 years old. This shook Maria's family, and there were even rumors that the family believed that Angelo kidnapped Maria. Teenage girls getting married and having children with older men is a common historical practice, but this is the most recent example I have come across with such a large age disparity. Today, Angelo would be considered a criminal, and it seems that is how Maria's family felt at the time. Angelo and Maria were never legally married, but by 1920 they were living here in New York with their 7 children. Maria's father Joseph and brother Louis lived in the same building, so whatever happened between Angelo and Maria seems to have been accepted. Angelo and Maria went on to have 15 children, several of whom are shown here in the 1960s. The Jonas Brothers have a truly fascinating ancestral story. From the mountains of North Carolina to the hills of Sicily, their story weaves through history, connecting both sides of the Civil War, including a relation to one of America's greatest presidents, and back to a story of loss in the Canadian wilderness. All of these unique stories and people came to produce a legendary family of musicians who captivated our hearts and minds.